everyone, welcome to the latest episode of Client Horror Stories, our friendly educational podcast for younger versions of ourselves so all you listeners and watchers can avoid the mistakes we have made. I'm honored and excited to have today Scott Kveton. I hope I pronounced your last name correctly.
Nailed it.
Woohoo! Yeah, who I contacted after I read a great article of his about some processes he set up, and I was like, I'm sure he has lots of great stories. Let's do an interview and find one. And here we are.
Well, thanks for having me. I appreciate it. And I think you're the first person to read that blog post in about 10 years or something like that, but it's okay. It was about meeting rules and all that kind of stuff, which is great.
Well, on the one hand, I would say some things are timeless and essential. On the other hand, I'd say I'm pretty good at getting to like the page 100 of Google results to find the obscure stuff.
Totally. That's great.
So let's jump right in. I'm sure you chosen quite an exciting story. Tell us the context and then what happened.
Yeah, it's funny. I talked to a couple of my Urban Airship co-founders and said, do we have any significant challenges with any like sort of client horror stories? And they brought one to mind that I thought was really funny. It was actually our very first customer. And it wasn't so much a horror story as it was us overestimating our abilities. Or I should say, actually, me over-promising our abilities. So I'll just kind of dive into the story. But so go back to like 2009. The iPhone's been out for a little while. Steve Ballmer's calling it cute. And everybody thinks it's kind of a joke, but clearly there's some momentum there. And Apple announced iPhone OS 3.0, which was going to have two new things, one called push notifications and the other one called in-app purchase, which is basically, everybody knows what in-app purchase is now, but we didn't, back then it was like, wow, this is really
innovative. Yeah.
And one of my, at the time, the four of us were technically unemployed. We've been working for another company. I was the VP of engineering there, and the company just folded. It was just a rough time. We're talking financial crisis, all that kind of stuff. And so Steven, our co-founder and CTO, came to us and said, hey, this new thing's coming out in about a month from Apple, and there are these push notification things. And we were under NDA with Apple because of how they do it. So the developers can learn about that stuff, but you can't talk about it, you can't tweet about it, you can't write an email about it, all that kind of stuff. So we had some insider know-how on that. And we were like, oh, this is pretty interesting. So he dug in and said, I think there's a product here. I think it's pretty interesting. And I said, okay, awesome. And so we were debating becoming an iPhone agency and doing app development at $300 an hour, and the market was huge. But I sort of told the team, look, I like to make money when we're sleeping. And so Steven's like, okay, I think there's an interesting product here, but I'm not sure. And I said, no, that's it. That's what we're doing. Let's do it. And I said, but instead of wasting a bunch of time and saying, we're going to do this in 3 months or 6 months or whatever, I said, let's do this and let's launch something in 30 days. And we got that because one of my other co-founders. What's that?
I like the challenge.
Yeah, and it's funny because we'd started another company about a year before that was selling bacon online, and we did the same challenge. We said, okay, let's launch this company in 30 days, and we did it in 21 days. So that was something that just kind of stuck with us. I like it too because it's a small outlay to dedicate 30 days. And if you fail, you can shut it down really quickly. More importantly, if you get it to market and nobody's there, guess what? You only lost 30 days. You can pivot or you can try something new. I really get, exhausted listening to founders who are like, yeah, we've been working on this for a year and a half. I'm like, how many customers do you have? Oh, well, none. We haven't launched it yet. It's in, it's private, it's stealth or whatever. I don't have time for that stuff. So I said, okay, let's launch in 30 days. And so the team was like, well, that's bonkos, but okay, we'll do it. It won't be really sexy. We'll have an API. We won't have a really nice dashboard or anything, but we'll have an SDK and all that good stuff. I said, great. So we get about 3 weeks in, and we're about a week from when Apple's going to announce this whole thing and a week from our deadline. And the team looks at me and they're like, yeah, we're going to do it. We're pretty close. And I'm like, oh shit. Like, I didn't actually think they'd do it. And so sure enough, we're getting closer and closer, and I have to get, my job is to go figure out how we're going to sell this thing, how we're going to get it in people's hands. So I said, well, geez, there's the big the Worldwide Developers Conference, yes. WWDC. And at the time they had this thing called the Steve Note, the keynote. that they did every time. And I said, oh, great. I'll go down there and I'll raise a ruckus and get into the show and do all that stuff. Well, it was so oversubscribed, it was impossible to get a ticket, especially a week out. So I was kind of screwed, but I said, you know what, I'll go down anyway. So I flew down, ran into some people who said, why don't you go down to the line? And I said, what line? They said, well, around midnight, the night before the keynote, people start lining up festival seating, in a line because it's festival seating at the event. And so I said, oh, okay, great. So I went to Costco and bought about $1,500 of donuts and danishes and a variety of, like napkins and all that kind of stuff. And I printed up a little placard that just sort of said, we do push notifications, all that stuff. And I showed up at the line around, I think 4:30 or 5 in the morning, piled out of a cab. This is pre-Uber. So I piled out of a cab, had a little cart and just started scooting around. And then there were probably 2,000 people in line already at 5 in the morning. And it turned out it was like fantastic. So I'm just handing out danishes. I'm handing out this thing, push is coming, blah, blah, blah. And I get to the end of the line, which is all the way around Moscone, which is a whole, whole city block.
I know the Moscone Center.
Yeah, it's pretty long. And so I get done, I hand out all my things. The doors open at 9 a.m. Everybody goes in and I'm like, well, I guess that's it, and so I just sort of let the keynote went off. Everything was really exciting. And while I'm there, there's probably 3 or 4 other companies that I see that are launching the identical push notification service because they all saw the same thing, right? So, and what's that?
Ooh, I just said, ooh.
Oh yeah. No, so it's so we're sitting there kind of freaked out a little bit, and I'm like, oh God, these people are, launching these products, and this is we're gonna get crushed. And I looked at their websites, and they had these sexy design websites. So we had this just I'm serious, it was so cheesy. We had a logo that we begged, borrowed, and stole to get made, and it was really kind of funny. And but what was interesting is normally when Steve Jobs would get up on stage, and they do this now, they announce a bunch of features, and then that's in June. And then the idea is that the developers get to play with them over the summer, and then they do the full release in the fall. And this time, because these were in such high demand, Steve Jobs said, instead of September, these are going to be available in 7 days. And so all of a sudden we're like, oh my God, 7, this is exciting. And sure enough, I start getting inbounds from that little card that I had. And it was people saying, hey, we want to do push notifications. You said you can do it, right? And the first call that I got was from a company called Tapulos. And I knew the CEO back in the day. So Tapulos had a game called Tap Tap Revenge, which was like Guitar Hero. And it was the #1 game on the App Store. And so Bart DeCreme, who was the CEO, called me. And he said, hey, we want to be the first app in the App Store with push. He's like, you guys do that stuff, right? And I said, yeah. He's like, can you do that? And I said, oh yeah, 100%. We'll help you guys. We'll work with your team. We can do that. No sweat. Because his team had looked at the docs and realized they couldn't get it done in a week. And so they needed to partner with somebody. Mm-hmm. And so I said, okay, well, let's just do it, Bart. Let's make it go. You and I will figure out the terms of the deal later. But at the end of the day, at least throw us a bone on the press side of things. And he said, oh, absolutely. That's great. So I connected the team, actually called my team, and I said, hey, I got our first customer. And they're like, oh, awesome. You got our first customer on day 1? I said, yeah. And they're like, who is it? And I said, it's Tapulos. And it just sort of went dead silent on the other end of the phone. And they're like, our first customer is the biggest app on the App Store. And I said, yeah, this is going to be great. And so we connected the engineering teams. They had a phenomenal head of engineering. Her name is Jessica Kahn. And she was just a saint to work with because she knew that we didn't have everything together. And that was okay. But they knew that they just needed something to work. And sure enough, the team was able to pull this together. And over the course of the next 5 days, they were able to ship it for Tapulos. There were definitely some ins and outs and there were some pains. And then, Bart and I negotiated a deal, which was, from a cash perspective was like $1,000 a month or something. But at the end of the day, we got press out of it, and it ended up being a TechCrunch article, and that just sort of like really spiraled on things. But along the way, I mean, pretty much every week with Tapulos, I kept making promises that the engineering team wasn't ready to deliver. And so we definitely had some grief, and I had to give some credits to them in terms of like monthly credits. And, not pay for things. And I sort of spoke out of turn a little bit with our press stuff. So I kind of turned them into a painful customer. So it's not like a horror story, but we definitely had to deal with that on a semi-regular basis. Along those same lines. Sorry, go ahead.
I have a question. I always find the introspective angle especially interesting, where it's because you're 10 years younger, first client, so less experienced than you are now. I'm intrigued at your hint that you did some things that turned them into a challenging client. What are some things that you did and that you've learned so now you no longer do, hopefully?
Yeah, I mean, it's a balancing act early on. I mean, it's funny if you've watched the WeWork or the Theranos documentaries, they're a fine line between brilliance and fraud. And Steve Jobs made a bunch of promises that he wasn't sure would be able to deliver. Bezos did back in the day. But they ended up succeeding, and I look at sort of Theranos and WeWork in the same way. Now, granted, I didn't do anything that crazy,
Right.
but I definitely pushed the envelope in terms of, features that we could promise, timelines that we could get them done in. And what was funny was my co-founders would be in meetings with me, and I would promise something, or I'd say, "Oh yeah, we can do that. It'll take us a couple weeks," or "Oh yeah, it's on the roadmap," things like that. And they would flinch, they would visibly flinch next to me. And we'd get out of the meeting. I'm like, just don't worry. We promised this thing, but it's okay. We have time. We can buy time and things like that. And pretty soon, within about 6 to 9 months, my co-founders started hearing me do that in a meeting. And then they would pile on and go, "Oh yeah, and in addition, we can do this, this, and this." And I'm like, I know we can't do that. But it was kind of funny to watch. And then, in terms of things that I did to kind of push them into that realm, specifically, when TechCrunch reached out to do the story on us, this guy named Marshall Kirkpatrick, who's just awesome, phenomenal writer, really great dude. And he, he asked me, "So did you guys kind of save their bacon?" And I said, "Oh, absolutely." And it was kind of a play on the fact that I was selling bacon before that and everything. So the headline was, Urban Airship saves Tapulos's bacon, right? And of course, that makes Tapulos look like crap with their investors and all that kind of stuff. And so that was a huge no-no, and I had to go beg and plead with Bart not to turn us off. But at the end of the day, the ink that we got from that was so freaking huge and pushed us so far ahead of our competitors. The other thing that's really interesting there too is everybody flooded to us because we had a downloadable SDK. We had documentation, and we had a support team on an IRC channel, sort of like pre-Slack. Yeah. And so we had people flooding in asking us questions. All the other competitors that had their big, sexy, swanky parties that first night, that were talking all this stuff, that had these beautifully designed websites, had one thing on their website, and it was enter your email and we'll let you know when the beta is ready. Yes. And there was probably a 45 to 60 day gap between them releasing and us being live, and it being live in the App Store. And that was the difference for us to lock up that market for the first probably 3 years. And we even had one of our competitors end up handing all their customers over to us because they just wanted to get out of the business. But they wanted to do right by their customers. So, it's interesting, and I'm kind of all over the. But yeah, sorry about that.
So I like picking out what I find interesting and diving in for a little bit.
Yeah.
I'm fascinated by this TechCrunch anecdote where there was this joke about the bacon that alludes, and it turns into the headline, which embarrassed the client. And I think there's a really good lesson to come from that detail, which is the role of humor. That a lot of people just always try to be funny. It makes boring situations more fun, and it shows off your cleverness, and you entertain the others. But it's really easy to remember that the other side can often misinterpret the humor, or let's say take a minor little joke and what happened here, turn it into the literal headline, which completely changes the dynamic of the joke.
Yeah, I mean, had it been buried, in the third or fourth paragraph, nobody would. But exactly. It was a clickbaity line, I think, for folks. And Marshall wasn't known for doing that, of course, but it just was. it caught people's attention and it got them talking about it. And, it was interesting because there were so many customers that were in that line who ended up reaching out to us, in the weeks after that event. And that $1,500 we spent on donuts and danishes was probably the best money we've ever spent at the company, obviously. Yeah.
I like the detail. It reminds me a bit of the famous Airbnb Obama O's story as well. Okay, so I like so there are a few lessons from here. One lesson is be careful when you make jokes; they can be taken out. There's another point that you mentioned in passing that I want to call out on because it's interesting. Is you mentioned Jessica, who is your project manager on their side that you interact with, and you said she was awesome. And I think that's important because especially when you're inexperienced or younger or making mistakes, having a great counterpart in the client side like smooths over so many problems.
Yeah, for sure. And it's actually a lesson that, we learned early on, both with Tapulos, but also, we applied, moving forward. We found that so many people were under so much pressure to deliver on mobile, and people had been moved into mobile as head of mobile or director of mobile, VP of mobile, whatever. And they had no clue what they were doing. So they were looking for expertise that they could trust. And what we learned is if we could succeed for them and turn them into all-stars internally, they would then love us, talk about us, all that kind of stuff. And so if we could make them heroes, that was game over. And what was really interesting is we had so many customers that we turned into internal heroes at, ESPN and Warner Brothers and Starbucks, you name it. They would go on to other roles at other places. And the first call they would make would be us. To pull us in. It's how we ended up getting the NHL, the NBA, like all these, because folks would leave ESPN and go to these other places, and then they'd call us and we'd get that business. And that was really, really effective. And I still to this day firmly believe that finding that internal champion and somebody who's trying to kind of punch a little bit above their weight internally and wants to sort of has some ambition. And if you can help enable them and really get them to succeed, you're going to have so much success from a product perspective.
I'm happy I mentioned about Jessica because this is an awesome and also a subtle lesson. So I'd love to hear what is something you did in detail to help Jessica or people in that sort of position punch above their weight, because I like what you're saying makes sense to me in theory, but I'm not yeah, great, you want to make them look good so they'll be excited to make you look good, but I don't see how to translate that into
reality. I guess in the case of Jessica, she was phenomenal, and she could have built a team that would have built our product in probably 3 or 4 weeks, but she needed it to go now. And the pressure for her was coming both from her CEO Bart, and also the fact that they were the #1 game in the App Store, right? So they have to be out there. So that's sort of a burden there. And I was really lucky to have some phenomenal technical co-founders. Adam Lowry specifically was kind of our keel. We had Steven, who was our CTO, and he was he continues to be, I still work with him to this day. The brainiac, comes up with all these ideas, can put anything together, self-taught himself all kinds of things. Like he self-taught himself Mandarin so that he could work with factories in China directly to be able to do printed circuit boards, because he taught himself how to build printed circuit boards. Anyways, that just gives you an idea.
Amazing.
Yeah. And then Michael Richardson was basically our head of product. And Michael was just so phenomenal in front of customers. He had a poli-sci degree from Reed, and I just absolutely love Reedies. That's where Steve Jobs went for a couple of years. And they think so outside of the box and phenomenal. And he was kind of a bleeding edge kind of guy. Wasn't super strong technically, but was really strong enough. And then Adam had a master's in computer science. He had that sort of, that keel that we needed. And he was the direct interface with Jessica. And Jessica, once she started talking to Adam, she felt a lot better because she knew that there was an adult in the room who was going to make sure that the trains were going to run on time. And that was, Adam was phenomenal at that.
So I love this breakdown of the different personalities of the founders, which actually I think leads to another interesting lesson, which is among the four of you, I think it is, each of you fulfilled a different role, a little bit like good cop, bad cop, but a more sophisticated version. There's the person who knows how to talk smart to this sort of person in the way that will charm them, and so on. And I think a great lesson is on your team. Make sure you have different people with different communication management types of styles, so you can interact healthfully with the different types.
Yeah, and I think there's a couple things to speak to that too. We had all worked together at the last company, so we'd kind of figured out how to work together. Now I was the VP of engineering; they all worked for me there, and so I had to sort of answer to a higher power, and we had to make decisions that we didn't want to because we felt like they were the wrong decisions from a business perspective. And so that was frustrating, but that sort of really strengthened our relationship. And then when that business spun down and we were all trying to figure out what we wanted to do, we knew we wanted to do something together because we had worked so well together, and we'd gone through some of those pains around, it's hard to find a brand new co-founder and go through some difficult times if you haven't been through some difficult times before. Right. Because you're effectively getting married. I mean, it's almost more than getting married because you're tying up, potentially investor money. You've got equity. There's all these things you have to take into consideration. And we won the freaking lottery. I feel like from a co-founding team, and we were able to just hit the ground running really, really fast. And for me, I learned from the fire hose as a CEO, and it's the only way to learn is to kind of do it. And hindsight being 2020, I would have given Michael a much stronger product role because he ultimately ended up stepping up to run all of our products. But we kept saying, well, he's not trained in product. He's never done product, but he actually had phenomenal instincts and was so good with the customers that he could pull out what they needed. I think he just didn't know it. And I didn't know that he could do that. And so much so that I actually ended up sending him, when we opened our office in London, I sent he and his wife for a year to London to help sort of anchor that office and really, embed with that team. And out of it, what happened was he met with so many customers. He was just brimming with product ideas when he returned that we just put him in charge of product. And I mean, the rest is kind of history. And, but it was awesome for him to take that for the team. I mean, we took care of him and got him over there, but, he had to, uproot his life to go live in London. And, he enjoyed it, but he was glad to get home.
Great story. And by the way, I'm going to extract a lesson out of that. It's fun for me extracting the lessons out of your mini anecdotes. You said that one of the reasons why you didn't realize sooner that Michael was a great product guy was he wasn't trained in it. And I think this is another lesson that comes with experience, that when you're younger, right, you start doing this right out of college, you're like, oh wait, you need a major in this. You study, where you're good at it. While after years, you realize that that's a lot less important than having instincts and intelligence and obsession. And instincts, intelligence, obsession wrapped together, you can kind of figure anything out.
100%. Yeah. And again, I also like to hire folks who, want to kind of buck for a promotion or looking to punch a little bit above their weight. The other thing, so I used to run I started this group called the Open Source Lab back, I don't even know, I don't want to date myself, like 2004, 2005, I think. And it was this group that we did at Oregon State University. And what happened was I had saved a whole bunch of money for the university by switching from like digital Unix and Solaris to Linux. So we had a bunch of commodity PCs and, through redundancy and all that good stuff, we felt comfortable with it. And it was a huge transition. We ended up saving like $450,000 a year for the university. And so the provost, basically the CIO for the university at the time was like, wow, this is really cool. He's like, what could you do with some of that money that we saved? And I said, oh, well, I'd start this thing called the Open Source Lab because it's done so much for us. We wouldn't have it if it weren't for open source. He's like, okay, I like it. He's like, take 300 of it and run with it. And I was like, okay. So we ended up building this thing called the Open Source Lab and ultimately ended up hosting things like the Linux kernel. We hosted Mozilla when it spun out of AOL, back when Firefox 1.0 was such a huge deal. We actually hosted the 1.0 download the day that it launched, which was just an awesome day. Drupal was there. I mean, there were so many different, Debian, all these things live there. And and I'm coming back to the point of don't worry, I promise. What was awesome was we started to get grants and things from folks like Google and other companies because they knew we were supporting them. So then we could hire a team of staff. And what they were is we just hired students. And I remember having students coming in that were, 18 years old. They were like, they had no idea what they couldn't do. And we absolutely loved it because we'd throw projects at them that we couldn't do. And we just said, go figure this out. You got a week. And, 2 or 3 days later, they'd come back and they're like, yeah, I got it all done. It's auto deploys. It's, I remember we had to like build out our LDAP infrastructure. And this guy named Alex Polvey, who we'd hired, who was just it was probably one of the most amazing hires we ever did. He actually went on to start a couple different companies. And he's had some just phenomenal exits. But what I loved was we just threw him in, over his head, and he just figured it out. And I always love that about folks. Anyways. Yeah.
Okay. So to wrap it around, choose your team carefully, choose the client carefully, choose who you work with, who you interface with carefully. I think these are all useful lessons and great stories as well.
Totally. Yeah, for sure. And again, you put people in a spot where they have to kind of figure it out themselves, and they tend to be able to do that, especially if they're motivated and they're excited about what you're trying to do. I mean, it's a lot harder to do that if you're building like a healthcare startup that isn't changing the world. But if you're doing something that, is really something fundamental to people and makes them feel like it's changing something.
So I happen to use a very similar approach. I just throw people into things. I know it's above their head. But I think my twist on it, I'm just curious for your approach towards, is I also fire very quickly, both employees and also I fire clients. So sometimes, like, as soon as I see the yellow flags, it's better to just like cut it 2 weeks in than just like drag on and on and on. Because I think the risk of throwing people in over their head is, guess what? Far more people drown when they go into the event than figure out how to become an Olympic swimmer.
Yeah, for sure. And I think there's, doing it again, I probably would have done something like that, where basically folks are on a probationary period. And you say it's a mutual probationary period. Maybe they're not going to like working for us. And then just see what kind of output they have, over the course of the first, 30, 60 days, whatever it is. What's really interesting is if you dig into on sort of the sales side of things now, they have AI tools that will predict, based on email activity, phone activity, how successful an SDR will be, a sales development rep will be. And they can determine that within the first 3 days, which is like kind of scary.
Wow.
There's some pretty cool tools that do this stuff now. They will fish or cut bait, in 3 days. It's crazy.
I like the phrase. Fish or cut bait. I usually use the much more vulgar shit or get off the pot.
Right, exactly.
I appreciate your wanting to keep this PG rated.
Oh, I mean, I think I swore already, but yeah.
I have you tried, out of curiosity, have you tried it to like that? Like, is the predictions accurate, or have you only just read about it and who knows?
Wait, predictions for?
After the first three days of data.
No, I've only read about it. Yeah. Although I do have one SDR that I've chatted with who was at a company that was using that tool, and they all hated it because they could ferret out people really quickly. And it just felt a little big brother-ish. If you're hitting your numbers, you're hitting your numbers. And, so if you, I don't know, I get it, but I also,
I see.
I also understand the tool, and you want to get maximize productivity. So yeah.
I see. So that tool does the same sort of thing I do, except I'm a human smelling it, as opposed to some program by the numbers. And I think people are scared of the Big Brother program that only looks at the numbers. while humans are at least theoretically better at taking into an contextual data. The first 3 days were bad, but her mother also died on the first day.
Exactly.
And so these are great lessons. I like the story. Any other final thoughts or lessons or tips to share about dealing with challenging clients to round up today's session?
No, I think you nailed it on the hit the nail on the head around fire quickly, both with clients and with teams. They're definitely we never fired any customers at Urban Airship, but boy, there were definitely some folks that I would have loved to, just because they were kind of a pain, or they for what they were paying, they were asking a lot, sort of that choosy beggars kind of thing. But at the end of the day, you just kind of you do what's right for them. You do right and think of the company as a whole, and then just move past it. And guess what? Ultimately, you're going to be way out ahead.
I agree with that. On the fire faster, both employees and clients, what I would add is it's not just about saving money because this client isn't paying enough, or that employee isn't productive enough. But more than that, and even more than the money, it's about this energy and emotional distraction. Like, some employees and some clients just suck you into their orbit in the most negative sense of the orbit. And it's taken me years and painful lessons in order to have the strength of resisting the dollar signs. I know it's negative energy, but I really want all those zeros. And now, hopefully definitely older, perhaps wiser, I have the strength to be able to resist that better.
Yeah, it's it's interesting. We definitely had some challenging customers, and we had a phenomenal customer success team. And I can remember times, it was interesting. We had this one woman on our team who was she was so good. She was so good with the customers. And what was interesting is, and this may sound kind of weird and I don't want it to, but she was fully aware of it, because she knew that she could diffuse a situation. Because a lot of times you have an engineer on the other side at a client, and they're dealing with another engineer on our side, and they're just butting heads. And we'd sort of bring her in as a woman, which was a rarity in the space. It was rare that these, it's a male dominated space. And she knew that she was a ringer. She could come in and just do exactly what she does, and it would diffuse the situation every time. I mean, it was really, it was fantastic. And it was awesome that she acknowledged that, she was able to do that as a woman in this space, because she was such a rarity. We didn't use it all the time, but she was awesome. She was so good. Yeah. Anyways,
these are great lessons, and what I've enjoyed most about this interview, to wrap it around, is in my previous ones, a lot of the people have the same sort of lessons. Make sure you agree to this in advance, make sure you document that, and so on. But all of today's lessons were a bit left field, so it's much more subtle. I like it.
I think most of my career is in left field, let's be honest. So
I think that's the way to do it. Who wants to be an automaton? One day you're going to die, and actually there are a whole bunch of cliches. I'll try to avoid the cliches tonight. Everyone can see where I'm going.
It's all good.
This was great. Thank you for the time, and everyone watching or listening. I hope you both enjoyed it and got as much value out of this as I did.
Awesome. Thanks, Morgan. Appreciate it.